Hi everybody, we're about ready to start. What I want to do is introduce myself first. My name is Dr. Chris Priest. Um, one of my specialties is working with illustration techniques. What we're going to do is, again, we're going to go from a drawing like this one, something that you could do in AutoCAD or Revit, a very basic outline type of drawing, to something like this one, where you're going to be able to see a lot of character with the pieces. So there's a difference between the two. We're going to work on getting really a lot of nice line weights, line quality, work with using different types of line, and then also talk a little bit about how to make it look a little bit like it's shaded. So we're going to work with a lot of line technique first. So we're going to start with a two-dimensional piece like a plan view. And again, let me just emphasize this. Architects and designers have been doing this kind of method for decades, at least 3 decades that I know of, where they will print out something using AutoCAD and then freehand illustrate it. The whole purpose behind the freehand illustration is to give it a little more of a human touch. Typically speaking, what you're going to be doing is working with something like microns or Stedler pigment liners. Okay, I'm going to be actually working today with some larger markers just for demonstration purposes. But typically we use a set something like this. These can be ordered from Dick Blick or a lot of office supply stores can get these for you if you order online. I'm just going to show a couple lines and then we're going to do a value study real quick. So what we want to do is try to do partial lines. Okay. Now, can anyone think why we do a partial line? Mainly because in the visual arts, it's been determined that your eye really likes to fill in detail. So if you do a little bit of a partial line, and then maybe even do a solid line, it actually makes it more visually interesting because your eye likes to fill in the blanks. I'm going to switch over to a different pen here for a second. What I want to do is show you the actual starting point. Whenever I go to do an illustration, this is where I begin. I'm just going to focus on this side over here. Let me quickly draw what I have here. I have a sofa here. Okay, I've got a table. Table has a lamp on it. Another side table with a lamp. Okay, I have a pair of, I'm going to call these coffee tables. They could have been ottomans or whatever. With the piece, we have an armchair here. And then another table over here on the side. On the wall, I've got windows on my wall here. And this is solid wall, this is solid wall. Okay. So I would assume, I could assume, if you're the designer for the space, you could assume where the light fixtures are located. Now what I want to do is just take another marker. So this is the way I typically would do this. I would try to figure out, do I want to show some light from the exterior? Do I just want interior lighting? I'm going to try to mix it a little bit. So I'm going to assume that there's some lighting from the exterior coming in. So with that, I'm going to throw yellow on here just to help remind me of areas where it may be lighter than other areas. So if light's coming through, there'll be kind of a shadow created here by the chair. So there'll be a little bit of light maybe out here on the edge. Definitely be some light on this table. Maybe coming through the window. Think about some light coming from this direction onto these pieces. A little bit of light in here, maybe a little less there. So a little more here, a little less there. Maybe a little bit in here as well. If I turn the lamps on, it would give a different lighting effect altogether. If I'm assuming that there's overhead lighting, let's say that there's overhead lighting which might be lighting up some of the artwork. So maybe there's a little bit of light hitting the top of the sofa, a little bit of light hitting the arms. All right. On the floor, probably this might be a lighter area, a little bit away from the window. It's going to get into some shadow areas, a little bit of light on the floor. And then if there's overhead lighting, we could kind of just assume a little bit of light maybe around the tables. All right, so that's just my rough. And that's just a really quick idea of where lighting might be hitting. If I was going to do a full value study, I would go back in and I would say, okay, so there's going to be some shading in here, shading there, some shadow here coming over, maybe some shadow on the floor over this way, maybe some shadow, let's go with that side. Always you could just kind of pick a side where you think would be the best shadows. All right, maybe a little darker back there. Okay, so something just to give you an idea of how lighting is affecting the space. And I'm just going to kind of put that up out of the way. All right, now I'm going to go back to our drawing. What I want to do is I do want to work somewhat freehand and somewhat with a straight edge. This totally depends on your comfort level and your skill level. So if you're really comfortable, you certainly could just work completely freehand on something like this. If you want to give it a little more sharp edge, then definitely grab a straight edge, some sort of ruler or a triangle, and then kind of give it a go. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to come in here and do a little bit of some dark areas first. And on my sketch, I've kind of got this kind of shape happening, showing where some shadow and shading lines might be. So I know for a fact that this is going to be a darker area. I am just going to use a solid line there. And then I'm going to double it so it's a little bit thicker. And I might even double it again. Now when you're using the Tech pens, they come in different widths, so you certainly don't have to double up on lines all the time. You could just work with different widths of pens. There is light hitting the front of the sofa, so I'm going to keep that a little thinner line. I'm also going to break the line a little bit and kind of use these breaks to show where light might be actually falling on the piece. Over on this side, and I know some of you that have worked with pen and ink before might be cringing because I'm kind of going over my pen and ink, but I have a rough idea how long it takes it to dry. So, all right, so let's go ahead and get the general shape in. I'm not going to use a straight edge for everything. I do like lines that kind of overlap a little bit sometimes. They don't all have to overlap, but some certainly can. There's some freehand lines here, some curved lines. You could certainly take a curved template or just, arc your hand in a way that it would work best. Just for time's sake, I'm just going to arc for now. There's kind of a little wood piece on the back. All right, and then the back of the sofa, I'm just going to use a straight line for that real quick. All right, it's also a really good idea if you actually have a photo of the sofa to look at that as you're doing this. Now, as we're working on this, here's what I want to do now. We've got the basic outline. Now what I want to do is, again, go back to my sketch of the lighting effects. So for this particular piece, what I want to do is I want to get some lighting or some shading through this area of the seat. And I guess if I wanted to too, I could go ahead and start giving some special effects, like maybe go from the corners to show a little bit of, just a little bit, let's say this is leather or some sort of softer material. Go ahead and give a couple little lines here and there just to indicate folds of the fabric. And those lines can just be like little rabbit ears coming out, little dots coming out, okay? Now, let's go ahead and get this shaded area in. I am going to use straight edge for this. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to start small in here and move to longer lines. And I'm going to try to keep all my lines, if I was working at a drafting table, I would probably be using a triangle and my parallel rule or my T-square. Okay, I'm just going to give a couple more little short lines here. Now I'm going to go back a little bit let's say I want to start maybe here, come this way a little. I don't want to give too much. Now I'm going to come all the way across with a few lines. I'm going to break some lines too, so it's not just too straight. All right, now I can go in and take a look at this and see what else needs to be done. What I'd like to do here then is maybe do some fill lines in between some of these. And again, if you're using different width pens, you could come in with some different tips. Let me get some little dots off the edge. Okay, you just want to get a little bit of line work in here. You don't want to overdo it. Now, on the back of the sofa, what I want to do is the same kind of thing. I've already got a dark line at the base. I'm going to come up, do the same type of effect. Except I am going to kind of break it going across to kind of look maybe where some light's hitting. So different types of lines you could use. You could use solid, different widths of solid. Okay. You could use some dots and dashes. You could use some broken, which are just some gaps. So whatever works best for you. Now I want to leave more light on this side, but I'm going to go ahead on this side and just make it a little darker. I'm just going to freehand that for now. And then over here on this side, again, probably just freehand a few little pieces there because it would be in a shadow more than likely. All right, so now let's do the back of the sofa, make it more solid. A really good idea when you're working with a piece like this is to give a nice outline to the piece as a whole. And that's also, you could come in and you could start giving a little more creative lines at that point if you want as well. But if you give a nice outline, and I would probably try to get some sort of French curve or curved item there. Give a little bit of outline to focal pieces. And what it does is it kind of helps the furniture piece pop from the drawing. So it gives a little bit of character to it. This would be, oh, that's right, the light would probably be hitting in here. So it'd be darker on this end. Okay, so again, what we're doing is we're just kind of, kind of being creative here, adding some creative line weights, working with some different types of line types. And again, this would look a little bit different if I was just using the tech pens, but for illustration purposes, this kind of works pretty well. All right, now the next piece is here. Let's see. Just trying to see what materials we were using before. Something like wood. Think about how materials look. A really kind of a fun thing to do whenever you're working with a different set of materials. Try doing some sort of material simulation. All right. So I'm going to grab a little different pen here. So I'm going to work on the floor a little bit. Now think about the floor and wood grain, and we've got some lighter areas in here, so I probably don't need to draw much in the way of wood grain. You could certainly go in. Oops. Just do a small piece here. You can certainly go in, add some of the wood grain, add some of the lines for the wood grain. I'm going to double these up a little. And again, in areas where you think light's hitting, kind of do some of those broken line effects. And then in areas where there's going to be a little bit of shadow, you could double up on line a little bit. Okay, so now with wood grain, depending on the type of wood you're using, you really can just kind of use an organic movement of your hand. These tips are very similar to these in the sense that they're round and they're flat on the ends. So what you can do is you could actually use it almost like this, like a chisel, where, as far as a chisel goes, you can have a very thick line, thin line, very thin line, and then you could have any grouping in that line, right? So you can do the same thing with these. You can get some really fine, thin lines, give a little more pressure and a little more verticality, and you get some thicker lines, perfectly vertical, and you get the thickest line. Now, as far as drafting goes, you would not want to do anything except a vertical stroke. But for illustration purposes, you certainly can play with these. So just come in, give some wood grain effects. Again, in areas where there's shading and shadow, you certainly can go in and double up on those or make them a little thicker. So experiment, play a little bit, try to keep the lines creative. I don't know how else to describe it, just using creative line weights. Don't try to follow the same path every time either. Try some different paths, some different methods. Maybe add a little bit of knot in the wood if it calls for that, if that's the style of wood you're using. Okay. And don't be afraid to, again, try some different, vertical, edge, play with it a little bit. And you've got a couple of options here. In darker areas, you certainly can just add more wood grain following the same curve. Or you could add like a straight line. Either way would work, just be consistent with whichever method you choose to do. All right. Okay, let's see, back to the sofa. What I want to do here, if you want to do something like a textured material, we've been kind of approaching this like maybe it's some sort of leather, okay, with some of these little lines. If it's a textured material or a tactile material, you can also do stippling. Now, stippling is one of those things that can absolutely drive whoever else is in the room with you crazy, because you're definitely going to hear the little beat. If you're going to stipple to music, make sure you've got some really upbeat music going. Stipple is a great way to show that the whatever the material is has some sort of texture. And again, same thing with stippling as with lines. You could use different type dots. Use some large dots and then have those kind of fade into some smaller dots. All right? Okay. Let's go ahead quickly and do like one of these two tables. Now, let's say that these tables do have some reflective quality to them. So what I would do typically is I would take some pencil and I would kind of sketch in an area that might be a bit reflective. So what I'm going to do is just kind of do a couple diagonal lines here. And again, if you did these in pencils, then you could erase them later. All right, so let me start there. Now again, if these tables are wood, what you want to do is think about the pattern of the wood. So if, let's say, the wood's going all the way across, what you could do is use these as a guide of where to draw more lightly or to leave completely white. So let's just go ahead and give a little bit of graining in here. Don't be afraid, give a little knot. You can have a little bit coming across. Okay, and on the actual piece, what you could do is you could use a straight edge again. Oops. Get off the paper. And come in, and you could either be perfect with your corners, Okay? Or you could be a little more creative with your corners. Your call. I kind of like the little creative ones sometimes, the little overlaps. You can get some little dots on the outside edge just to kind of be interesting with it, keep it interesting. To show where like a shadow might be placed, you could just double up the line. Oops, using the wrong pen. Okay, so we were kind of focusing on the shadow maybe being on those sides. So all I did is just go in and kind of double up that line. And then you could just do it again if you want to really show that there's going to be some shading on that side. All right. I know we don't have a lot of time here today, but let me quickly do a little bit with a three-dimensional piece. All right. And then if you have to go, you're certainly welcome to, or you could certainly stick around and just kind of work on part of the sofa. So same kind of idea with the sofa. I would use the same kind of method. You know, go in, determine where light's falling. You know, so in this case, maybe it's falling more up here on the top of the pillows, maybe a little bit on the front of the seats, definitely on the top corners of the arms. Okay, maybe a little bit in here. So just kind of think about where light's landing. All right, and those are places that we want to leave just completely white or have very little line work in. All right, so now I've got a general idea for what I want to do. And so same thing, let's go in with our pen. We're going to have darker area in the back. So what I want to do is just make this back completely dark. And again, you could certainly use a straight edge for this. And I'm just going to double that line a little bit. Okay. Now, same thing underneath, because we know there'll be a shadow cast underneath. And again, I'm going to double that line, but with some broken line. Just kind of give it a little more interest. The back leg, again, those could be pretty solid lines. Front leg, maybe the back part of the front leg can be very solid. And then the base could be solid. And then this front piece, maybe it's got a little break to it. Maybe a little bit of lights hitting down below. So you just want to keep that out. I'm turning my tip a little so you could use a thinner pen. I'm going to do a little thinner line on the base. I'm not going to do the whole thing. And then same thing up here. I want to do a little bit of thinner line where these folds and creases are. And I want to draw kind of a base line and then maybe come on top of that with a little different line. So it's solid base, so I get some shadow, and then on top of that, maybe to show where there's some cording or welting on the fabric. Okay, and then these little side pieces where their seams are, a couple little double lines. And then for the top piece, I want to come in very light. Don't want any solid lines on the top piece. Again, I want to show that maybe light is hitting that piece. All right, coming up the arms, same idea as this front piece. I don't want too much of a solid line because I really want to show that light's hitting in this area. I could have a solid piece there. Now coming from back to front, I could go solid and then start breaking it up a little bit as I get towards the front. And these are just some ideas. Obviously, you know, as you start developing your own technique, you could just have fun with it. But one of the things I do try to emphasize in class, don't just stick with a solid line. Break it up, especially for a sketch. Again, if you're drafting, you need to be just spot on, perfect line quality all the time. If you're doing some sort of sketch or conceptual drawing, you have a little bit of room to play. So doing the back of the pillow dark, side of the seam dark, and then I want to break up this front seam a little bit. Okay? So again, it's just kind of an indication where light might be hitting. And again, if you don't like the dots, then you can just use broken lines. And again, as I get towards the bottom, I'll make it darker and thicker, and then keep it kind of light as it goes up the side. So anything that's folding over onto something else, you can make a little bit darker. Anything that might have light hitting it, break it up, use a thinner line. All right, and I'll just add a thick line back here because I know there's going to be some shadow back there. Same thing behind the pillow, add a really thick line because I know there's going to be some shading behind the pillow. Okay, so again, just kind of, get your pens out, play. Find a piece in a magazine or print off a perspective from a class and then just put some tracing paper or some vellum over top of it and start illustrating. And just start having fun with the pen and ink method. You'll be using this method in quite a few classes. Any class where you produce a drawing using SketchUp or Revit or 3D CAD, you certainly could print that and then do creative line work and really humanize the piece, give it a human touch. Of course, if you're creating a perspective from scratch like you might do in a more of an entry-level class, again, you do get your rough drawing under here, and then you can do some of these creative line techniques just to kind of pop it out and make it look a little more interesting. All right. Well, we are out of time, but I want to thank everybody for being here today, and I certainly appreciate your time, and glad you were able to be here. So, any questions on anything specific you might like to see? Yes.
Sorry. I typed it in there. The markers that you're using, what are they? What brand are they?
These are Prismacolor. And I should be a salesman for Prismacolor because I can't imagine how many of these have been sold to students over the years. They are available again online at Blick. They used to be called Dick Blick. I think it's just blick.com now. They're also available at some office supply stores, but they work fantastic. Let me grab a couple, please. Lighter grease.
You can also get them at Hobby Lobby.
Oh, okay. Yeah, Hobby Lobby. Thank you. That's a good spot. So, like, here's a 50% grade. These are kind of fun. So once you get your basic drawing going here, you could go in and start using marker. Now this is on vellum, so marker on vellum, gives you a lot of extra lines because it really kind of forms an edge. But there is marker paper, and on marker paper, it has two sides, and one side is like vellum, the other side absorbs, so you get a little cleaner, smoother stroke. But you can go in with, like, this is a 50, and then you let that dry, and you go over it again, and it takes it up to about 55, and then let that dry, and you could keep going until you get up, probably 70%. But you can go in with these markers and come up with some really nice effects. But yeah, these are Prismacolor markers.
Okay. Thank you.
Fun to work with.
How long does it take to dry?
Seconds.
Okay.
Seconds to dry. Again, on vellum or mylar, it takes a little bit longer. You can kind of see I'm kind of smudging stuff around right here. But on marker paper, it dries pretty fast. Or what I also like to teach students to do in some other courses is to just do your drawing as best as you can do your drawing. Print it out on just regular bond paper, copy paper, printer paper, and then render. and it has a little different effect, but it dries immediately on that paper.
Okay.
So but these are definitely fun to
Thank
play
you.
with. I could just This is one of those things I love teaching classes like this because you just sit here and play with marker. So definitely next class I
This
do
used
we'll
to
do
be.
another marker one. I've got some marker presentations out there as well. Um, One just kind of like this presentation, you'll see these pieces of furniture probably, that is out there on YouTube as well. And we do post the recordings in the help forum. So if you guys aren't
Okay.
familiar with the help forum, make sure to look that up. It's you could access it from any of your classes, or see the link to it from any of your classes on the any assignment page.
Okay.
So, but
Thank
they
you.
are anything we have recorded, we try to post out there. Yeah, you kind of see this is kind of marker paper is kind of, or vellum's kind of funky. So I just kind of erased everything I just did, but that's okay. Let it dry. If you're brave, you can take your finger, smudge it, or take a smudge stick and smudge it. Get some different texture.
Did you
So,
say something about an egg?
about a what?
Like an egg or something that smudges
Oh, not
illustrators?
an egg. There's you could use a okay, a smudge stick works. You could use a lighter color marker. Like I have some markers that are clear blenders. Um, they just have the fluid but no pigment. So those help kind of smooth things out a little bit. You could
Okay.
use your finger, like I said, a finger, piece of paper. You could put a little bit of pencil on top of this. Let me grab. The only pencil I have out is white, but pencil's great because you can add a little bit of highlight. And then if you get a little too much highlight, you again take a little paper and you can smudge it around a little. You could also go over that with with marker, and the marker kind of dissolves the pencil a little bit. So you can get some really interesting effects. So,
Thank you. That's really cool.
all right. All right. Well, thank you all for being here today, and we will hopefully see you in a class someday soon.